Welcome to our short webinar, Selecting the Right Digital Product Passport Service Provider. We are EcoPRM, a software solution for the digital product passport and more. We developed the idea for EcoPRM in February 2019 and officially founded the company in February 2021. So we have been active in this field for quite a while. We have a practical background, and during our work with various mechanical engineering manufacturers, we recognized that there was a need for a software solution for the digital interaction between the manufacturers of products and the end users of products. Straight from the start, our solution has worked in the same way as the EU's digital product passport is intended to work in the future. Unique QR codes or NFC labels on the product enable an interaction between the manufacturers and the users. Our customers, for example, the manufacturers or distributors of products, work in our web-based backend, where they manage and organize the passports, the codes, and of course, all content and interactions. When we started, there was no solution like ours available, and we had to do a lot of groundwork over the last few years. First of all, we had to explain why a QR code solution makes sense for the digital interaction between product manufacturers and their users, which added value it brings and what improvements are possible for the manufacturers themselves, but also for their customers, of course. We often still have to do this today, but slowly the tide is turning. Due to the eco-design regulation, the digital product passport and the battery passport, the issue is becoming increasingly prominent in people's mind. And this has also led to a significant increase in the number of potential DPP service providers on the market. For manufacturers considering working with such a partner, this can now become somehow confusing. This is why we put together this presentation. We want to show you, and we have learned a lot over the past 5 years since we have been on the market, which decision-making criteria should be considered when analyzing and selecting the right software partner for the digital product passport. What are the important criteria? The first point, obviously, is the knowledge of the EU digital product passport. A few years ago, this was not really relevant, but in my opinion, now it's a very important criteria, especially with the upcoming regulatory requirements surrounding the digital product passport. A potential software partner should have a good knowledge about the regulation. What is coming, what are the timelines, and what is also still unclear. And they should also be transparent and honest about the EU compliance. So if someone says today, as of January 2026, that they are EU DPP compliant, that can't be true because no one can be yet. Points you could have a look at: is the provider a member of, for example, the Surpass 2 project? Is he active in associations like the VDMA? Is he maybe a member of the Battery Pass Ready project? And does the provider offer good and technically sound information documents on the digital product passport? The second point, also relevant from a regulatory perspective, is the knowledge of digital operating manuals with regards to the EU machinery regulation. As a first step on the way to the EU DPP, manufacturers of B2B machines have been able to implement digital operating instructions since 2024. However, there are a few things to consider. Is the supplier aware of these things? Can they comment on it? Do they also provide some information documents about these topics? And do they have answers to the questions like the required format, the permanent function of the codes on the product, and so on? The third point, and this is actually relevant for both the DPP and the digital operating manuals, is the usability over many years and an exit strategy. The machinery regulation requires at least 10 years of availability for the digital operating manuals, and this is similar for the digital product passport. How does the software provider deal with this issue? Can they provide a well-founded answer? And also very important in my view, do they offer a sensible exit strategy if you want to change the provider? Can data, structures, and assignments of the DPP or QR code URLs be exported, white-labeled, and so on? In my opinion, these 3 topics here are the basis for even considering the provider further, because If the regulatory issues are not taken into account, you run the risk of having to make another change at the point in time when the DPP becomes mandatory. And by then you will probably have other tasks to deal with. Point number 4 could then be the price of the software solution. I assume that all DPP service providers will offer their solution as a software as a service model. Quite simply because it is necessary to be able to react dynamically. If the EU requirements change, they must be implemented. And new requirements will come from manufacturers and their end customers as well. And these must also be incorporated into the system in a timely manner. So we are talking about ongoing annual costs, plus any initial setup costs maybe. Where could and should you pay attention to? Is the pricing model transparent and scalable? Do you only pay for what you actually use? How many features are included in the price? And how does the provider respond to special requests? How flexible is it to add further functions in the future and at what price? And are you comparing apples with apples or apples with oranges? And since I just mentioned the famous apples and oranges, I would like to go into more details about the functions of the solutions. Point 5, therefore, how flexible am I as a manufacturer in terms of content and the presentation or design of the web app? Do you have rigidly defined grids or are you flexible? Every company has different priorities when it comes to optional topics. Can these be implemented within the solution? Simple topics such as can you use your own design, your own color, your logo, but also more complex ones such as can you freely configure the structure of the web app and how good looking can you make it? The page, the app, the web app behind the QR codes are also a flagship to your customer and should meet similar requirements as your own website. In my opinion, this also includes the multilingual capability, and therefore point number 6. Can you store different languages and structure the content for these in a good way? Is the right language automatically displayed to the end customer? So the people who open the codes or the product passes. And what about translation features? To make this flexibility possible, what is the technical situation at the software provider? And therefore point number 7. Which data formats can it process? PDF, HTML, XML, CSV, Excel, zip. Which limitations are there? Does the provider offer interfaces, both simple ones and imports from CSV or Excel, for example, or email functions? And especially important for the future, does the provider offer interfaces such as a REST API? But also important, can you customize the URLs behind the codes? Are there white label domains? This is an important point for the longevity of the codes or the passes on the products. And then also important, can you further customize the solution if necessary? Can you use your own code, for example, for the integration of iframes or similar? This may not be important at the start, but it will be later on if you want to expand your system in a modular way. And the keyword modularity brings us to the next point, number 8. How modular is the solution? Can you expand your content at any time, both the voluntary and later the mandatory content within the framework of the EU DPP? And also with regard to data formats, how does the provider respond to the question of what they will do if the EU DPP standardization specifies certain data formats? Can they expand? Modularity and maximum flexibility also bring some complexity. But point number 9 is also important. How user-friendly is the backend designed? Such a system must be capable of a lot, especially to be future-proof. But how is this all structured? In mechanical engineering and component manufacturing, for example, a balance must be struck between maximum flexibility and modularity on the one hand and a good structure on the other hand. Do I need to be able to program code or is a good training good enough? And while we're talking about the subject of training, point number 10, what about support? Does the provider offer personal contact persons? What does he say about the introduction phase, training and help with any questions? Do they charge for support separately or is it all inclusive? And how quickly and professional does the provider already respond during the demo and coordination phase? And while we are still talking about the professionalism, what about software testing? Be sure to ask how the solution is tested and what the release cycles are like. How are technical problems handled? And also important, what about the uptime of the solution? Are there any status pages, for example? And what do the terms and conditions say about the uptime? Finally, there are a few more points that should definitely be on the agenda. How much project experience and references does the software provider have? What about general legal knowledge, or in other words, GDPR, legal notice requirements, and also ask how well connected the provider is in case there are more in-depth legal questions. For example, in which associations the software provider is part of, and if they have a data protection officer, for example. From our point of view, these are important points that should be considered. Of course, this is never a full list and the individual topics should be considered individually. But this could be or could form the basis for a professional analysis. Let's imagine that as a manufacturer, you have found 3 potential software suppliers that you would now like to take a closer look at. These are, of course, only fictional companies. Then you could analyze them, and we have actually seen that in practice using a spider web model like this one. Depending on the weighing of the points, you can then quickly and clearly see which supplier performs how well in which areas. It is important to note that the EU requires interoperability with regard to the digital product passport. It will therefore be possible to change the DPP partner at a later point. However, in my opinion, it is very important to deal with these points at a very early stage and not to make any hasty decisions. Because changing later always involves extra effort, and you definitely don't need that when you have to comply with EU regulations. We at EcoPRM would like to be included in your analysis. With our concept of the Smart Product Passport, we are actively preparing for the EU Digital Product Passport, while at the same time offering a wide range of features, which bring added value already today. In the video description, you will find links to our landing page and to other videos. Thanks a lot.